English translation. 669th Contact. Part 1 Sunday, the 1st of January 2017, 13:29 hours.
Hello, you are coming earlier than you said you would, but welcome and greet you, dear friend. Why you did not call me? Because I was in the kitchen talking to some of the group members. But because I still have a problem with my computer and the accounting files, Piero will come to fix it. It will not take long, but then you will have to go behind the bookshelves, or you will have to go through the gate back into your room for a few minutes.
Greetings also, Edward, my dear friend. It has fortunately turned out that I could come here earlier than planned. Thank you for your welcome. It will be enough if I go behind the bookcases and wait when Piero comes. And if it really does not take long, it will not be a problem either.
Good, then it is settled.
Now, if you want, you can ask your questions right away, which you could not ask on my last visit because I had to leave. If it is possible for me, then I would like to answer them. I did not call you, however, because I observed that you were busy talking. But before that, I think you will want to know the latest state of the world's population, which we determined last night at exactly midnight.
Of course, because this is important. But it also applies to the exact number of fictitious refugees who have entered or crept into Europe through the refugee welcome culture of the mentally disturbed German Chancellor Angela Merkel.
I can also tell you these dates, because we have also finished our registration for the year 2016 at midnight. Then listen. The overpopulation of the earthly humanity has increased by about 104,995,000 persons to the exact number of 8,739,001,024 human beings. Unfortunately, it is to be said that the Earth's population is wrongly calculated by a mathematical formula and regularly compared with false estimates by various authorities. It is wrongly claimed that the world population is increasing by about 2.5 human beings per second, which means that 2.5 more human beings are born than die. This, or rather the calculation of the German Foundation for World Population, is extremely incorrect, because it lists far fewer births than actually take place, which means that up to the present time there are about 1,350,000,000 more Earth humans living on. The planet then is indicated by the mathematical formula system and the world population clock. This in turn is used to make the claim that there are fewer births every year. But this is not true, because the opposite is true.
Powerful. Thanks for the statement. And that the truth is, of course, denied and completely false statements are made. That is typical for the Earthlings responsible in this respect, but which also include those lying elements who lie that everything on Earth is not getting worse but better in every respect. And this is only because the media has recently started to report more news of good and progressive things, such as that illiteracy is decreasing in some places and that more Earthlings would have better living conditions, etc. But what is really happening and existing in the background in an increasing number of evil, bad, evil, and inhumane things is tried to hide and conceal with good and positive things in news. So, in this way it is tried to sell the human beings of Earth even more as stupid and dumb, and to deceive them even more than it has been done since the media is only looking for sensations, distorting and falsifying the truth of reality and fooling the readers and listeners with lies and deception.
Which unfortunately cannot be denied and also cannot be changed, because the media earn their money with it.
Yes, and they are also politically and religiously inspired and committed, so that they orientate themselves against all reason and truth according to it, according to every miserable political leadership and their delusional belief in God. But something else. Do you know how many small and big criminals of all kinds have crept in all over Europe, including Switzerland, as well as criminals against life and limb like murderers, and how many members of the Islamic State are waiting to carry out assassinations and who are also infiltrating and recruiting new willing people for the IS, as well as rapists of women and girls and social welfare fraudsters and the like? Do you have any percentage figures on how many crimes in total, And how many violent crimes in Europe and Germany have been committed by asylum seekers? Sham asylum seekers, refugees, economic refugees, and infiltrated terrorists, etc. in 2016 as a result of Merkel's welcome culture.
With regard to the criminals and violent criminals who have infiltrated all European states, our registrations for the whole of 2016 show a total of 131,476 persons, but they are in fact spread over all European states, which also includes Switzerland. This figure mainly refers to legal and illegal criminal immigrants from various African, Arab, and Asian countries, as well as from South and East European countries. We registered 102,108 in Germany alone and 916 in Switzerland. The remaining number is distributed among all states of the EU dictatorship. Other bogus refugees, such as economic refugees and those who only want to apply for financial help, are not included in our registrations, because if they are neither criminal nor violent criminals, they are of no relevance to our investigations in this respect. And as for your question concerning percentage calculations, such calculations are extremely wavering because they have to be specified according to criminality or crime, which is not relevant for us. I also cannot give you any information in this respect. Only a part of the majority of all refugees corresponds to effective refugees who seek protection for their lives in European countries and flee from acts of war in their home countries.
Nonetheless, the refugee culture created by the mad German chancellor has been the real cornerstone of the refugee flows into Europe. It is true that, according to your information, more than 70 million human beings are already on the move as refugees worldwide, which is why only a small percentage of the 1.6 million or so who came to Europe in 2016 or crept in illegally are against it. But if we consider that in the next 2 centuries, as the prophecies explain, not only wars and terrorism, but also climate and environmental destruction, and the resulting shortage of food and water will create an overpopulation of 250–350 million human beings as refugees, then the Earth, its human overpopulation as well as nature and its flora and fauna, will face very bad times. But what I want to say about the criminals and violent criminals, etc., who have crept into Europe legally or illegally, they are still being lifted up into the sky by false humanists, especially in Switzerland and Germany, and everything is being done to protect them from the law for their crimes and offenses. This will be particularly true now that everywhere, especially in Switzerland and Germany, as elsewhere in Europe, over the Christmas and New Year holidays, the police and other officials and security forces carried out strict controls, made arrests, and protected and safeguarded the populations from murderous terrorists and rapists. Incorrigible, morbidly effeminate, weak intellectual and bean-throwing false humanists, who come specifically from left-wing political camps, or who otherwise could not exist in their effeminacy and incapacity to live without the protection of the police. Officials and other security forces are in the foreground in order to criticize the protection officers and the protective measures in the crackdown. And when these idiotic and pathological fools and intellectuals suffer harm even by criminals or violent criminals, they are the very first to cry wrath and murder after the security forces, officials, and police have failed to provide security. Wait, you also heard it. It will be Piero who rang the bell because he has to explain something about the bookkeeping to me in the computer.
Then I go behind the bookshelves.
Good. Then I open the door and let Piero in. Puta, you can come out now.
It was really fast and only took 2 minutes.
Yeah, but now I've lost the thread of what I wanted to say to everything I was talking about.
What you said before corresponds to an undeniable fact. And as far as the other thing you mentioned is concerned, it is unfortunately no longer avoidable. Because on the one hand, the mass of Earth humans has already become so rampant that many disasters are already so pre-programmed that they can no longer be prevented. On the other hand, the natural processes of flourishing and life in the whole of nature have already been destroyed to such an extent that the whole thing cannot regenerate itself again. This is because, as a result of the degenerated machinations of overpopulation, the triggered destructive climatic, planetary, natural, fauna, and flora processes are being continued irresponsibly. And this continuation of the whole thing, the unstoppable further increase of overpopulation, the destructive machinations on the whole planet Earth, its atmosphere and air, its climate and waters, the fields, gardens, floodplains, forests, and meadows, and thus on the whole of nature and its fauna and flora, make it impossible to regenerate even in the smallest form. And since the long-since Earth human beings' delusional creation of descendants has been bringing about a decrease in the intellect, reason, and intelligence of Earth humans for several decades now, which is becoming more and more obvious, ascertainable and recognizable, it is not to be expected that in valuable time all destruction and thus also the rampant overpopulation will be stopped and a worldwide birth control will be introduced and decisively enforced.
Tell me about it, dear friend, because the majority of the hidden Earthlings do not want to see the whole thing, and therefore also go through life with blinders on.
What you say I do not understand. What does in disguise mean, and what are blinders?
This is another name for being blind or seeing nothing. Actually, the term comes from the language of hunters, and means that a hawk, for example, eagle, falcon, or sparrowhawk, has a leather cap put over his head so that he cannot see anything and keeps quiet. Symbolically transferred to the human beings, it means that they walk blindly or blindly through the world. The speech is also used in a similar way, walking through the world with blinkers on, whereby one only sees straight ahead, but not left and right. Blinders are palm-sized rectangular, square, oval, or round flaps made of fabric or leather, which are also known as blinders, blinkers, eye patches, or leather. These are usually shields made of leather, which are attached to the bridle of horses and donkeys next to the eyes of the animal. Usually these flaps are attached to the bridle of horses at eye level on both sides, thus preventing the animal from seeing to the side and back, but they are also intended to prevent the animal from being frightened. Blinkers are also available for the human beings, which are attached to glasses, for example. In human beings, the expression blinkers means that the human beings have a limited angle of vision, or that everything is one-sided and narrow-minded. This saying is only common in the German and Swiss German language since the beginning of the 19th century. The term is also often used for the human beings who stubbornly look or think in only one direction in order not to perceive problems. However, for the human beings, wearing blinkers also means that they do not take advantage of certain opportunities and thus suffer disadvantages or damage. It is also a fact that the human beings who have blinkers and therefore only look straight ahead, but not left, not right, and not backwards, are usually stressed out by everyday life or have immense existential fears. However, they feel overwhelmed by many situations and would therefore prefer to be left alone.
Thanks for your explanation. The whole thing was not known to me.
It also does not refer to the usual Swiss German and German language usage, but to special idioms that are not learned during the actual language learning process, but belong more to general education.
I see, but once again I would like to thank you.
That's all right, you are welcome.
Then I would now like to comply with your request, which you made during one of my last visits, regarding the first one-way telepathic conversation my father had with you. For this purpose, it will be necessary for me to speak the whole thing to you, after which you can then simply insert everything my father said and also record it in his annals at this point of conversation, when you recall our conversation today. So my father's notes say the following.
First telepathic contact conversation from Thursday, the 3rd of February, 1944. Statements of Sfath according to his annals transmitted by Tar.
These are my first thought-transmitting words of instruction today, which I am transmitting to you, which are also being recorded, and which, as I know from looking into the future, you will desire in the distant future to make known to the peoples of the earth. But what I am teaching you today in a thought-transmitting way is the announcement of all those things, events and values which I will also teach you into the future, often repeatedly, with regard to your behavior and also with regard to many future events on Earth. This means that they will not be prophecies, because all that I will explain to you several times in the coming years in this thought-transmitting way, and also personally face-to-face, are predictions and therefore events that will occur in the future, and which I have also seen in the future. I am still teaching you in this respect for the next few years, as I will also teach you in writing and in the German language, so that you will have mastered both in a decisively good way at the appropriate time. And when you write or speak, you must learn to do so in an absolutely neutral way, without integrating your own thoughts and the resulting feelings into decisions and advice, because only then will you be able to master logic, to see and judge everything correctly without condemnation or even anticipation. So whether you have to make decisions or give advice, on the one hand, there is always the need for your absolute neutrality. But on the other hand, there is also the need for you always to analyze and judge the exact facts, but not simply their characteristics, because the actual fact embodies the true importance, which must be analyzed and worked through in an analytical and neutral way, and formed into a correct and valuable decision or advice. So it is also necessary that you always speak consciously and in detail when you have something to explain, because it is always necessary in every respect that your explanations, statements are so unambiguous that they are understood beyond doubt by the reader or listener. If, however, your explanations and words are not sufficient, you must be patient and explain everything again and perhaps again in other words, and again until understanding is sufficient. This is what you have to do in every respect, both in terms of everything related to your mission and in a purely private way. This will also be necessary when you take my predictions, which will also include a few prophecies from your memory, and process them into articles and letters at your own discretion, shaping and spreading them in your personal manner, which will not be until 1949. You will then be a herald, the herald of the modern age, to whom you will ever at the correct time write down my predictions in your own characteristic manner and pass them on to public authorities who will act on Earth as information brokers for the people, and who, as public means of communication, will make available to Earth humans all that is necessary for knowledge. These single information powers are the worldwide print information mediators, such as book and newspaper producers, but also leaflet and poster producers, etc. Teleprinters, which are also in the process of being developed and which will connect the world in written form in 25 years' time, should also be used. Films, radio and radio broadcasting, as well as public television, which will be found in all modern homes, should also be used to spread the mission in a neutral way, and thus without missionary character. What is very topical, however, is that in the future a form of communication and publication will be of great importance, which is known worldwide as the Internet, and which will be used by billions of people all over the world for a wide range of topics. So in the coming period, the New World communication technology of this electronic information network will be used in particular to spread the mission, because this global network, for which the foundations will be laid in the coming 1960s, will enter its commercial phase in the first 1990s, making this internet the world's most important communication platform. You shall use all these forms of publication little by little during the time of your life and make known the signs of the coming times of Earth humans. In particular, you yourself will also spread worldwide in writing and language through your own various publication organs what the future will bring, because mankind will degenerate more and more in all imaginable relations with the earthly world. We will be helpful to you with our knowledge, but how you also have to contribute a lot in your life to create the necessary means of every kind, which will be necessary to fulfill your difficult mission. Your whole existence and your way of life will never be easy, because you will live an adventurous and very difficult life, which will make you stronger and enable you to fulfill your difficult mission. You will fight criminality in foreign countries, protect human lives, and provide life support, which will be rewarded, and you will be able to build up everything necessary for your mission. You will also do varied and hard work and necessarily learn all sorts of trades, which you will later use to build a place that will serve to fulfill your mission and become known all over the world. It will be a place close to the birthplace of your mother, which you already know and which you will make the center of your fast-working global mission with the help of your faithful. But you will meet many enemies who will be full of envy and know-it-all, hatred and evil, who will threaten and slander you. Even from your own family you are going to found in Greece, as well as from your followers, who often have been loyal for many years. And there will also be many attacks on your life, but you will escape them because a sensory factor within you warns you of them, and you will act accordingly. But you will still fulfill your mission against all the adversities that will come to you and affect you, although you will be scolded as a prophet and truth scout, as a deceiver and charlatan. But you will not be alone, for you will have a loyal following at your side, which will be very helpful to you, but among them will also be traitors who will break their loyalty to you and your mission after a certain time and shamefully commit treason, often only after many years of working together. And it will also be this in your family through wife and child, which will affect you just as deeply in your thoughts and feelings and put a strain on your psyche, but which you will learn to understand and to cope with through your hard and difficult life teaching. Through the power and the will of your consciousness, you will become stronger despite all malicious resistances by a large number of antagonists. Note Billy equals sign antipodes or antagonists. These are the first details and realities which I am going to bring to your attention today, and which I will also add to your consciousness at a later time by means of apparatus. However, you should think about them from today on and draw your own conclusions from them, because this will be important for your experience and the experience of your personal learning.
Thanks. That was a lot at one time, but I had tried very hard to grasp the whole thing and put it in my memory, so the whole teaching became part of my whole life behavior. But thanks a lot that you also livened up my memories with it. And if I may ask you once again that you can also organize my first letter, which I wrote in 1949 and sent to many media in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. I am sure that would also be of great value.
For my next visit, I will pick out the letter and bring it with me. But I have here a prediction of my father, which he told you during a conversation on Saturday, the 14th of June, 1947.
Prediction by Sfath from the Contact Conversation on Saturday, the 14th of June, 1947.
The Earth humanity will weep in future times because, through their own fault, there will be sad things, events, wars, terrorism, and destruction in future times. A religious sectarian delusion of faith, which is becoming more and more prevalent, will in future encourage apostasy or renunciation of the true knowledge of reality and the resulting truth, which will also involve disregarding the natural creational laws, making this renunciation the worst of all evils in future times. It will be true that many believers in religion and sects will officially renounce their religion or sect, but they will still remain addicted to its dogmas and forms of belief and will preserve them, which is why they will continue to disregard and disobey the natural creational laws, thus preferring darkness to light and not turning to the real and its truth. From this will come the finding that death is better than life, which is why many Earth humans will no longer look to the safety of life, but will prefer to die, whether by direct suicide or by indirect suicide in connection with acts of war or terrorism. The human beings who devote themselves to reality and to the truth arising from it, and thus also to the natural creational laws, and who shape and lead their lives in this way, will be considered mad and ungood, while, as has been the case since ancient times, the believers in God will be considered good and wise. And this will be as it has always been, because the religious and sectarian human beings will become mad in their faith and will do many evil injustices and acts of war and terror, for which they will be considered bold and, in their farewell to life, the best and the good, while they will insult and despise those who strive for peace and freedom, and thus also for reality and truth, and for the natural creational laws. This is what they will do in future times, because their thoughts and feelings, as well as their psyche, will be corrupted, because they will be unpeaceful, unfree, and dissatisfied with everything that concerns them, just contrary to those who think of reality and truth. The believers who think they are better than those who sincerely strive for truth, love, peace, and freedom will hope to attain immortality through their faith in their false God. But they will be disappointed because they will not find their way out of their life's doubts, dissatisfaction, and fear. In this way, they will cover the righteous who strive for reality and truth, and live in this way with malice, mockery, sarcasm, ridicule, and cynicism. All this is the truth that will come to pass in the future in an ever more blatant way, as it has also happened since ancient times, whereby the God-believers will try to humiliate with stupid laughter and mockery all those who, as those who know, strive for reality and the given truth, and will devalue their knowledge as nonsense. It will even be that there will be danger of death for those who cling to the cultivation of intelligence, the knowledge of truth, and unswervingly to reality. It will also be that many new legal systems and new laws will be enacted, but these will not point to the truth doctrine in a word, but will, on the contrary, protect false religious beliefs and the believers in religion and sex, because this is supposedly worthy of heaven and will prevent a regrettable separation between God and the human beings. This will cause wretched human beings to mingle among human beings who, through lies and slander, will brand those who know the truth as corrupt, Thus, believers of religions and sects will lay hands on those who know the truth, or will try to do so, and thus many believers in their delusion will lead themselves to crime, war and terror, as well as to robbery, lies, slander and betrayal, as well as to all that will seriously damage the nature of their own consciousness and psyche. So it will be the believers in their unnatural faith, as it has been since time immemorial, who in their delusion do all evil and promote war and terrorism, demand punishments unworthy of life for others, and themselves take up arms in order to use them irresponsibly against fellow human beings and kill them. And through politics, religions, and sectarianism, terrorist organizations will emerge through which mass and bestial, innocent human beings will be murdered. Everything will come apart at the seams, and there will be no more order, which can hardly be maintained on a small scale, but cannot be completely restored. The earth itself will also become unbalanced and will no longer have a regular seasonal rhythm, because the mass of human overpopulation will destroy, annihilate, and exterminate an enormous amount of nature and its plants and animals in order to satisfy their desires and needs. And this will happen in the near and far future, just as the oceans will also become fished out and partly unshippable. The regular course of the stars will also be disturbed, while the majority of Earth humans in their religious delusion will not respect the voices of those who know the real truth of reality and fight for it in a teaching way. Although attempts will be made to condemn their voices to silence, which those who believe in God will not succeed for a while. But the seed of truth will often, and for a very long time, fade away, unheard, before the seed rises and bears fruit. And consequently, until then, much of what is good will still be spoiled, and much of the earth will cease to be fertile, just as the air will also become heavy to breathe in its gloomy slackness. There will be an absence of any order, as well as a confusion of all rules and values. And when all this will have come to pass, then the remnant that remains of Earth humans will have to restore the sublime totality of the world in a very laborious manner over many centuries and millennia, clearing everything up in peace, freedom, and goodness, to put an end to all the transgressions that have taken place and to the general corruption of Earth humans. But it will be asked whether Earth humans will be decimated by epidemics, or whether they will consume the world with fire or destroy it completely with wars and terrorism, or whether they will preserve the earth and return it to its original beauty. According to these very serious predictions, the fulfillment of which is unavoidable, the coming times will bring great upheavals well into the third millennium. First of all, unprecedented prosperity for all sections of the population, as well as immense wealth for many who will become multimillionaires and billionaires. This will make the human being selfish and greedy as never before, which will also increase crime and violent crimes to a high degree, which will also maliciously corrupt and abuse all the rules of good, as well as cause countless people to give up all their good intentions, which will lead to degenerating anarchist machinations, with young people and medieval people being particularly affected. All that is good and progressive, as well as all that is worth living, will be forgotten by many human beings and trampled into the dirt, which will also result in a decline from all morality and thus corruption of morals, up to the state-permitted open and taxable whoring as has never been seen before. And furthermore, bloody and radical extremist groups in the Nazi manner will emerge from the last World War in Europe, Russia, the USA, and other countries. But murderous terrorist organizations will also emerge, especially in Arab and Near Eastern and directly Asian countries, where America's intelligence and warlike machinations will wreak havoc through war, murder, and destruction. The terrorist organizations that will emerge in the next few decades, which are the result of U.S. intelligence and war crimes, will spread around the world, as will various later terrorist organizations which will also emerge from the criminal, military, and intelligence activities of the United States of America and cause many deaths. The USA itself will also not be spared by this emerging terrorism, especially when, at the beginning of the new millennium, New York is hit by much suffering and destruction, and terror will claim thousands of human lives. But soon after, a new outrageously violent terrorist organization will emerge in the Arab world, which will carry on such a bloody business as never before under the guise of a religion. The emergence of this terrorism will also be blamed on America and will itself bring untold suffering to the whole world. The new terrorism will be so enormous that only the most serious military operations and battles will be able to partially overcome it, while other terrorist and criminal organizations cannot be countered even by large police, security, and military forces. But long before this worldwide spreading terror organization is created, which will be joined by tens of thousands of young and medieval, misguided, work-shy, adventurous and criminal beings, who will then spread torture, horrible deaths, rape and destruction. A dictatorship union will be founded in Europe, with headquarters in Belgium, which the European states will join. This dictatorship, which will be led by power-hungry rulers and which will aim to bring all European states under their thumb, as well as possibly also non-European countries, will rekindle the West's traditional enmity against Russia, together with America, will be viciously fueled by infamous machinations, possibly to provoke a military campaign. Then, in the new millennium, the time will come when millions of refugees from African, Asian and Arab countries will flood the European states because an unpredictable ruler of the dictatorship union will call for flight behavior in Africa, Arabia, and Asia. Thus, some time after the turn of the millennium, tens of thousands of criminals, violent criminals, and terrorists will be smuggled into the states of the dictatorship union, which no one will be able to control comprehensively. From the 1980s onwards, there will also be widespread unemployment, worldwide inflation, and public debt, which will make all food and other commodities ever more expensive. Overall, the value of money will fall worldwide, which will be particularly true in Europe, with the introduction of European money. This will drive especially the member states of the dictatorial union emerging in Europe into horrendous debts, as mismanagement will also result in financial debts or even bankruptcies, which in many cases can only be prevented by state financial aid. All this cannot remain without consequences, for the peoples will rise up and possibly go on to revolution, which could be the point at which, according to an old prophecy, Russia will rise up against the governmental terror directed against it by the European Union and America and attack the West overnight, whereby Europe would then be free of its dictatorship if the dark prophecy were to be fulfilled in this way. This could also mean, as the same prophecy says, that Europe would then be pacified by Russia, which could also spread throughout the world.
Thanks. I can only vaguely recall this prediction. But now I would like to ask how many A4 pages of your father Sfath's annals actually cover me, if you know that.
I really do not know, because the records are stored in an electronic form, but the amount is very considerable. In my opinion, if I had to convert everything to the size of A4 pages, which would be very labor-intensive and lengthy, the annals would add up to thousands of pages.
But you do not have to do that, please, because it was just a question. Then I would like to talk briefly about the pole shift, which Sfath also mentioned, which is progressing more and more, and also contributes to the fact that the climate change caused by the criminal machinations of the overpopulation is even increasing. Because the pole shift to the south also brings changes. As you told me some time ago, the Earth's magnetism has long since shifted from the Greenland side, so the pole shift has long since moved eastwards to the south, so the magnetic pole point is now in Siberia. You also said that the latest data on how far the pole magnetism is moving south is no longer 50 kilometers, but currently nearly 72 kilometers per year. But since I have been asked a lot about the pole jump or the magnetic pole movement, I would appreciate it if you could explain something about this.
Although we have already talked about it several times during our whole contact time, I can, of course, explain some things again, especially because there have been big changes which you have already mentioned, concerning the change of direction of the wandering magnetic pole. On average on Earth, there is normally a magnetic pole shift or pole jump every 250,000 to 500,000 years. On the Earth planet, the last pole shift took place about 782,000 years ago, which means that the pole shift now taking place is very delayed. However, it is a fact that the now taking place pole migration leads to the fact, as I have already explained once before, that also the Earth magnetic field has lost about 12% of its strength since the beginning of the pole shift. The magnetic North Pole first shifted towards Alaska and Greenland, but from there it shifted in the 20th century alone by around 1,500 kilometers from Alaska towards Siberia. The speed of the migration to the pole increased over time from a few meters to kilometers, with the influence of Earth humans also contributing to this. On the one hand, through the large number of atomic bomb explosions, and on the other hand, through the exploitation of Earth humans' resources, through which the planetary balance has been and continues to be seriously disturbed. The exploitation of resources leads on the one hand to disturbances in the balance of the planet, but also to the fact that asteroid and meteorite impacts also lead to disturbances in the balance. Because the masses of resources taken from the Earth and exploited in a downright predatory manner can no longer perform their shock-absorbing function. But back to the wandering pole magnetism, which is currently moving in a zigzag pattern through the Siberian tundra, changing very rapidly in its strength and showing a current migration speed of about 72 kilometers per year.
Yes, these are the facts you have recently given me. But I think we should talk about this a little more, also in the sense that the so-called pole jump and the magnetic fields of the Earth are reversed and are very popular with doomsday conspirators who go into the mad and confused claim that the Earth's magnetic field reversal means the end of the world and the destruction of the planet, which is of course absolute nonsense, because the Earth has already had thousands of pole jumps since it was founded. In fact, the polarity of the planet, or the Earth's magnetic field, has been reversed many times in the course of the Earth's history. As you have explained, and as our geologists have also been able to ascertain from their investigations of the Atlantic seabed and other research. According to the measurements they have carried out, they also say that in periods of 25,000 to 500,000 years on average, a pole jump has taken place, as well as that the last one took place about 800,000 years ago, so that the next one is more than overdue. Only the geologists are not sure, however, apparently yet, whether the next pole jump now runs off with delay or not. But you say that the pole magnetism migration is now effectively underway.
That is correct and without doubt, because the pole reversal has already begun several hundred years ago and is inexorably running.
If I may resort to my knowledge, the Earth's magnetic field is generated in the Earth's core, which consists mainly of molten iron, in the form of gigantic iron crystals that are constantly changing in motion. The Earth's magnetic field is caused by fast convection currents or equalizing currents as a result of temperatures of different temperatures. The convection current is also considered to be the motor for the tectonic movements of the Earth's plate. In principle, the liquid part of the Earth's core, but also the Earth's mantle, the Earth's crust, the oceans, and the influences from outer space play an important role. From there, the enormous heat also rises, which liquefies the interior of the Earth as magma, which rises to the border of the Earth's mantle and, in the case of volcanism, is ejected from the volcanoes as lava by powerful explosions, or, in the case of lava vents, simply swells out of the Earth in thin fluid form. So heat is generated inside the Earth, which also cools down and heats up again, etc. In addition to the entire crystal transforming and liquid process in the Earth's core, the core rotates and a current flows through these overlapping movements in the crystal glowing liquid Earth's core, which is why the whole thing can be described as a gigantic planetary dynamo. Through this in turn, through the Earth dynamo, which I would also like to call geodynamo, electricity is created and with it a flow of current, through which in turn an induction is created. That is to say, a generation of electrical currents and voltages, through which the magnetic field is created. The Earth's magnetic field, which also extends deep into the space of the world. This magnetic field also surrounds the Earth, which can also be depicted as a horizontal figure 8, in the center of which the Earth is arranged, and from whose north and south poles the Earth's magnetism radiates. This protects the planet, nature, its fauna and flora, and mankind from deadly solar radiation, just as this magnetic field helps the Earth and also animals of all kinds to find their way around. Unfortunately, according to your explanations, the earthly magnetic field is getting weaker and weaker, which is the conclusion of the pole reversal or magnetic field reversal, because the complete reversal of the Earth's magnetic field is in progress. Although such a pole jump could lead to the end of the accustomed lifestyle of mankind, but the whole thing would not cause the end of the world, as crazy conspiracy theorists and prophets of doom try to drive the believers into fear and terror with their feeble-minded assertions. Maybe you can also say something else, maybe how the migration of the poles is created.
As you have said, pole reversal began several hundred years ago, and a pole reversal occurs when enough large areas of the outer core of the planet are aligned opposite to their surroundings. However, such a process takes decades and millennia until the polarity has completely changed, which is noticeable by a weakening of the Earth's magnetic field, as is also the case with the Earth planet, where the strength of the magnetic field has decreased over the last 200 years or so. This is a typical and undeniable sign of the pole shift that occurs on Earth. Already in the next 500 to 1,000 years, the process of polar collapse, also in connection with climate change, can have partly dramatic effects on Earth, which can be severe under certain circumstances. For example, the magnetic field that deflects the solar winds to the poles. Shielding and protecting the Earth from radiation could be gradually weakened, exposing Earth humans and nature and its flora and fauna to increasingly strong solar radiation. And this could be the case, for example, if solar particles were to punch large holes in the ozone layer. This would also mean that the technical apparatus and equipment of Earth humans would cease to function, because the coronal mass ejections of the Sun would lead to irreparable disturbances in this respect. This would render all electrical and electronic achievements useless, such as electrical installations of all kinds, such as high-voltage networks, but also electronic apparatus and equipment such as computers and communication systems, etc. And this could be the case is proven by the fact that for a number of years now, solar storms or solar tempests have also been able to repeatedly affect the Earth's magnetic field and also satellites, including GPS and communication satellites. If the Earth's magnetic field becomes even weaker over time, it is also possible that the electricity distribution network may collapse, either partially or completely, as has happened irregularly in recent years, but in more distant times it may be interrupted again and again or even fail completely. This should be seen in such a way if effectively bad effects should occur. Possibly it could result, as it rarely happens with planets, when a pole jump occurs that 4 magnetic poles are formed. In any case, this could lead to problems in nature and its fauna and flora, because orientation disorders would occur as a result of multimagnetism, because in this respect the animal and wildlife world in particular is dependent on the Earth's magnetism, as is the world of insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and the aquatic life, etc., which navigate their paths according to the planetary magnetic field. It must be clearly stated, however, that the now effectively taking place pole migration and the weakening of the Earth's magnetic field, which is connected with it, will not lead to the extinction of Earth humans, but it can mean. And this also depends on the whole of humanity and its future general behavior and work. That the entire standard of living with all its technologies and achievements of all kinds can collapse, and that new beginnings for continued existence must be sought and created in every respect. The world will not end, however, but will continue to exist as before, just as life on the planet has always been, just as it has always been with all the thousands of poles falling. A pole jump can always be survived, at least most life forms will always survive, and also when certain areas become dangerous areas, mainly inland and in higher and mountainous areas.
As I said before, all the Doomsday Prophet's claims are pure nonsense. And it is also nonsense that the process turns the inner core of the Earth and thereby shifts the surface of the Earth, which is ultimately to destroy humanity. Now look here, I have written down these questions here so that I do not forget them. You have told me in confidence some things about the so-called crop circles, and also pointed out that about 88% are artistic works of Earthlings, but we have not spoken openly about this yet. Although you said that the earthly works or earthly crop circles are made by extraterrestrial forces, you also said that only from the end of the year 2016 this fact may be officially mentioned, so I will talk about it now. But it would be interesting to be allowed to say something about the remaining 12%, which have other origins than earthly work, whereby I only mention those percentages which can be traced back to terrestrial planetary sources, which are also connected to light phenomena, which appear in grain fields, etc.
Of course, we can speak openly about this if we do not also want to mention the other factors that we are not allowed to address.
That is the point of my question, because what you said before was never complete, because certain things had to be kept silent about, which is no longer necessary, as I understood your words at the time. And the rest, which still must not be addressed, we do not need to discuss that.
Of course, that is correct. A certain percentage of crop circle appearances is, as you know, not the product of Earth humans being, although I cannot give the exact percentage for directive reasons. What I openly address in relation to crop circles, as well as other symbolic formations in other natural straw plants, that is to say in various grain fields, as well as in grass, bamboo, rape, and reed, that is to say sweetgrass, does not refer to works of Earth humans. These are in fact based all over the Earth on purely Earth magnetic phenomena, which, however, are related to early Earth humans' energy force practices, the effective nature of which must be concealed. This is because if today the old practices in this respect, which have fallen into oblivion, were to become known again then, due to the unreasonableness and greed for war of Earth humans, their use for the production of a very dangerous military weapon would be unavoidable. This would have extremely far-reaching and serious consequences, which I could not be responsible for if I acted against our directives. It would also not be in our Plejaran sense as a whole. On the other hand, as far as the extraterrestrial influences during the creation of the crop circles are concerned, I can only explain again the same thing, in other words, as I have already explained to you earlier. Namely, that the extraterrestrial forces which are created during the creation of crop circles by Earth humans correspond to normal, natural, universal impulse vibrations. These influence everything and anything, including all genera and species of human beings, including Earth humans beings, as well as all matter and all fauna and flora. These energetic impulse oscillations correspond to cosmic natural forces, which create all works of art of nature, and also create perfect symmetrical forms of various kinds, which arise everywhere and also in the open nature in everything that exists. All imaginable circle forms, squares, octahedrons, hexahedrons, cubes, crosses, etc. are created, which appear in many materials such as plants, crystals, ores, and especially snowflakes. When it snows, enormous masses of snow crystals fall from the sky as frozen works of art. Billions of them, whereby no two snow crystals are the same, because each one is a unique piece of nature or the extraterrestrial cosmic universal artistic vibration. All living beings are also affected by the whole, which means that
English translation. 669th Contact, Part 2. Sunday, the 1st of January 2017, 13:29 hours.
Please excuse me if I interrupt you, because I think that something should be said about the formation of snow crystals. Because I think that many human beings on Earth do not know how snowflakes are actually formed, which is about the same as rain, about which I also wrote once. From the Earth, dust particles are whirled high into the atmosphere, so-called aerosols, which, depending on weather conditions and temperature in the cloud cover, become saturated with water, become heavier than the air, and then fall down to the earth as rain, hail, or snow, depending on the circumstances. If a perfect snowflake is created, it represents a hexagonal prism, which is the simplest form that solid water can take. The snowflake is actually an ice crystal, which is formed because the water molecules take on a hexagonal structure when they crystallize. The fact is that each water molecule has two hydrogen atoms that are slightly positively charged, and one oxygen atom that is slightly negatively charged. The two hydrogen atoms naturally attach themselves to the oxygen atom, resulting in a hexagon or hexagonal shape. Every ice crystal has a hexagonal basic structure, and from this basic hexagonal shape the crystal ideally grows symmetrically. The real ice crystal, however, is not simply a small, flat structure, but rather a highly branched, intricate structure that weighs only about 1 microgram and consists of around 100 trillion water molecules. Although there are about 80 different basic crystal forms in total, which are formed into many more, there are actually no two identical snowflakes. So no two snowflakes are identical, but they all have a hexagonal geometry. It is not possible that snowflakes have only 4 or even 8 arms, because they are all based on the hexagon or hexagon, the very structure in which water crystallizes. A dust particle or aerosol is thus transformed in the cloud, forming a ball of dust and water and thus a raindrop, which also happens when a snow crystal is formed, but the temperature required to form it is much lower than that of a raindrop. I learned from your father Sfath that when an aerosol in a cloud is saturated with water, the water freezes to a primal crystal as a result of a low temperature between -10 and -22 degrees Celsius. From this, a hexagonal shape is formed, which is the actual starting point of every snow crystal. These are generally called snowflakes or also snow stars, but they can only form or grow at these low temperatures. The more humid the air or the clouds are, the finer the filigree arms that are formed, whereby the whole ice crystal structure is 6-armed, which is called a dendrite, which in Greek means tree or trees, from dentro. Very seldom are there 12-armed snow crystal cores, but this only occurs when two hexagonal crystals collide and connect with each other.
Schneeflocken die Welt der himmlischen Kristalle, photograph by Kenneth Librecht.
Thanks, and the explanation was probably necessary. Further, I wanted to say, all living beings are also affected by the whole, and consequently also the human beings, in which the human being creates and brings to bear the whole of the artistic through his consciousness and, thus also through his thoughts and imagination, as well as through his actions and artistic creations. With regard to crop circles, this is especially true for certain Earth humans with regard to their artistic impulse vibration receptiveness, if they are sensitive to it. This leads to the special creation of the so-called crop circles, because the cosmic universal artistic impulses give them this ability. Therefore, it has to be said that these crop circles are made by Earth humans. But they are not purely Earth human beings, but effectively an extraterrestrial phenomenon or a cosmic universal size. As far as the light phenomena you mentioned are concerned, I am familiar with two different categories of light, one of which consists of basically invisible ascending, but under certain circumstances brightly shining noble gases such as argon, helium, neon, krypton, radon, xenon, and ununoctium. The noble gases, which are constituents of air, have outstanding characteristics with regard to their chemical inertness. Helium itself is formed continuously in the Earth's interior by radioactive decay products of uranium and other radioactive elements, and is therefore also found in some natural gases, in percentage terms depending on the area of the country. Radon, on the other hand, is a product of the radioactive decay of radium, which in turn is the result of the radioactive decay of uranium and thorium. The continuous formation of radon means that it is constantly present in the soil in small quantities and is released from the soil into the air. Another phenomenon of light phenomena is marsh gas, which is produced as a naturally occurring mixture of methane and carbon dioxide, usually in the marshes of swamps by fermentation of plant parts with the participation of bacteria. However, it is also possible that swamp gases are formed over fields, floodplains, fields, and meadows, which can also appear as luminous formations, where no swamp can be seen at first glance, but where one or more swamp bubbles exist somewhere underground, allowing the gas to escape upwards into the open air. Another possibility of light phenomena is based on visible and moving, luminous spherical or disc-shaped electromagnetic light formations, which are very small but can also reach a size of more than 1 meter. These luminous structures rise to a height of 1 or 2 meters, float around in irregular orbits only to collapse and dissolve again, or rise high into the air and disappear. The whole thing can be compared to ball lightning, as you know it from personal experience. Other things concerning light phenomena and unknown flying objects around the worldwide crop circles are the result of Earth humans and private pranks on the one hand, but also of military and espionage research achievements on the other hand. This is especially true in England, which is considered the mother of crop circles in crop circle expert circles, and where the main centers of crop circles are surrounded. What to say about the remaining percentages? Unfortunately, I am against our directives, which I have to follow because I cannot talk about them.
Dear, thanks for your explanations, for which I think it was also necessary to redefine the extraterrestrial influences, that is to say the cosmic universal oscillations, whereby the earthlings are stimulated to the artistic crop circle works. Everything else I have said should also be of interest to many who are genuinely interested in everything and do not allow themselves to be turned into fantasy-filled believers by sectarian unreality. There is, however, one mystery that has not yet been solved, and that is how the angled, altered, and sometimes burst or exploded growth nodes of cereal stalks come about. Can you explain something about this?
This also has a very simple cause, which is based on the electromagnetic radiation, which creates a tension, and thus the knot housing is torn open or bursts open, as you say. Exploding cannot be said about this because the electromagnetic effect does not produce heat, but only tension, which causes the growth nodes to rupture,
This is exactly what Sfath, your father, already explained to me. He also explained to me that it is the growth nodes, which are only supposed to grow on cold nights, that give the stem its stability. From this I concluded that the more nodes a culm has, the more stable it has to be. And if I remember correctly, the knots do not appear every few centimeters, but nevertheless, depending on the coolness of the nights, at visibly short intervals. And the more growth nodes a culm has, the more stable it is. He also let me look at such growth nodes with a super microscope when I was allowed to look at different grain circles with him as early as the 1940s. It was obvious that the growth nodes of the affected grains showed anomalies, but these were not caused by heat, as Sfath explained, but by electromagnetic tension. The growth nodes of cereals and grasses, etc., are the part of the plant that acts as a joint and is so strong that when the stalks are bent or pressed down by wind and storm, etc., they can be repositioned on it. The growth nodes are the area from which the plant grows, and which therefore also has a special elasticity. And the fact that the so-called crop circle researchers have suspected for a long time that strong heating causes the growth nodes to burst open is of course pure nonsense, because your father Sfath has on the one hand explained that there is no heat effect, but only a very strong electromagnetism, and on the other hand he has also shown me experimentally that growth nodes in cereals do indeed burst open due to electromagnetic influence. Sfath explained that when heated, the inside of the plant would expand, causing the cells to burst, but that this was not effectively the case, because electromagnetism in this form is a cold process and therefore also acts cold, which is also the reason why the growth nodes and stalks would retain their special elasticity and altered shape, which could not be the case if the whole thing was caused by heat radiation. I think I'm allowed to say all this, because the silence only lasted until the end of 2016.
That you can keep your silence, that was never a question.
Sometimes it's hard, but if you're always careful, there is also no problem. Here and there you also have to act stupid or ignorant, but I avoid doing that by lying.
This is no secret to me. And besides, I know that you understand perfectly well how to always find ways to talk around an open truth when necessity demands it, to keep the silence to which you are obliged. Even if you are often considered stupid for this reason, which obviously does not bother you, you know how to keep your silence.
This is too much praise, Ptah, because your father Sfath deserves it because he taught me the value of silence.
This is interesting, of course, and I know it. And now I cannot help but express my respect for you and tell you what thoughts and feelings keep moving me. The whole of what you have learned and done in your life is part of what has shaped the picture of your life. Because through your silence you have learned to be always true to the truth, even if you had to talk around it without falling for a lie. If I may compare you to a cornstalk, I would like to say that the cool nights when the pliable growth nodes grow up are like the hard times you have lived through, and which you often did not like, but you have overcome them anyway. This is how your knowledge, your behavior, and all the values of your life came into being. And the more crises you have gone through, the more knots have appeared in all your behavior, in your steadfastness, your endurance, in all your actions and activities, and the more stable, sustainable, successful, and truthful, you have become a mature human being who can bear the full responsibility of his difficult mission. And if even now and in the future a great storm comes, sometimes a great storm, then you can bend, because you are strong and you go forward and you will stand firm even in the storm wind, just as a spike cannot bend because of its many strong growth nodes. And the fact is that I have always known that whenever cold nights and times came and will come in your life, you always thought and will continue to think that they had and have a purpose and that you gratefully used, and continue to use them to keep yourself afloat, and to mature your mission, and to pass it on as a sound and stable teaching to Earth humans that it will bear ripe fruit one day. Even if on a larger scale it will only be in the further future. And I say this because I know it, and because I am aware that you trust in your work, and know that it will bring benefits to Earth humans for all the difficult times to come. This will be so, even if in the future, as in the beginning in the first 3 decades of your mission, it was very difficult and in some cases has continued until today, which the uninitiated can hardly or not at all measure. Only what has happened to this day, through the antagonism of many adversaries, as well as through disloyal members as a result of betrayal of the mission and of you, would have led another human beings to lose courage and to give up everything, while you unswervingly fulfilled your duty and kept your word of promise.
Please.
My words are serious, dear friend.
I'm sorry, Ptah, but your words, I think they're a bit much.
You do not have to comment on that because it is only the truth.
All right, you obviously mean what you say, so I will not say anything else and I will not growl either. It is just...
Please.
All right then, nothing more.
It had to be said once and for all against all the lies and slander on the part of your adversaries.
All right, then everything is said, I think. Which is why I want to talk about something else and ask you what your father Sfath once mentioned in the 1940s. He spoke at that time of a drug that was given to all Nazi soldiers and also to all the Allies, through which they became brutal, boisterous, euphoric, murderous, and unscrupulous, and became effective despisers of humanity, killers, robots of torture, rape, and murder. Sfath called the drug horror drug and gravedigger drug, which was actually intended as a drug for depression and for calming nerves and the mind, and was called Pervitin or something similar, and was banned in the 1980s. Can you say something more about it?
Yes. The methamphetamine Pervitin was a well-known stimulant drug similar to the body's own adrenaline, which was also declared as a wake-up drug in the Nazi army and which was the real precursor of the heavy hallucinatory drug crystal meth. The addictive Pervitin was administered to the soldiers of the Nazi Reich during the last World War as a stimulant and as a drug for brutality and recklessness, to make infantrymen, sailors, and pilots braver and unscrupulous, as well as to enable them to perform supernatural feats. The remedy was addictive and required that more and more of it had to be added to the body to achieve the desired effect. This resulted in psychological and other health damage, as well as numerous deaths from excessive use. From 1944 onwards, another drug became topical in the Nazi army, the so-called pill de-inks, which consisted of 5 milligrams of Eucadol, also 5 milligrams of cocaine, and 3 milligrams of Pervitin. As in the Nazi Wehrmacht, the Allies and their forces did the same for 3 years, with the drug, invented and produced in Germany in 1938, also being smuggled to the U.S. Americans by profit-obsessed merchants, and later, from 1939 on, when it was introduced into the Nazi Wehrmacht as an unrestrained drug also by traitors. This is how it came about that the U.S. military powers of the time also had their hands in the drug and supplied their armed forces with this drug, as well as with opiates which were considered drugs. This, whereas the English, French, and Canadians were not directly and therefore only in isolated cases affected by it. However, these facts, which were revealed to the Allies by the U.S. military forces, are still kept quiet and denied by the U.S.
To deny facts about crimes and dirty murders and other facts, etc. To trivialize and trivialize everything is the custom of most politicians, military and secret services and all their supporters around the world. As I also learned when I was in Israel without permission and met 2 former Nazi henchmen who were able to live in Israel scot-free and work for the state service. But according to certain people, such facts, underhandedness, and criminal behavior should not be mentioned. Nor should expressions like idiots, stupid, dumb, brain amputees, etc. be used for people for whom, if the truth is to be told, no other names can be used. This is stupidly mocked by certain human beings because they think that such expressions should not be put in the mouth and should not be used in public because of decency and good behavior. But I do not share this view, because the truth can only be clarified with words of truth, which also include such honor and dignity-deprecating terms and designations, because only these express what has to be said, explained, and made understandable. Slimy words and terms do not help to clarify and explain the truth, and therefore do not bring any success. But this cannot be understood by human beings who mean themselves better than their fellow human beings, but who also believe that, as a result of their education, they are more predestined to be able to judge which choice of words and manner of speaking as well as designations, especially those that are elevated according to their meaning, should or may be used for people whose catastrophic mistakes in behavior must be pointed out. For my part, I have had the experience, and have also had it time and again, that slimy words and designations, which should be used instead of harsh words of truth, do not stimulate the human beings to think and reflect. On the contrary, this happens when hard words are used to explain the truth, which human beings usually do not dare to utter, because they feel addressed and set their world of thoughts in motion. But human beings who think they are better off with slimy, dishonest, and socially acceptable untruth words and soft terms for people who are disastrously misbehaving and irresponsibly harming their fellow human beings and the people, be they sectarians, politicians, military men, presidents, as well as people who hold doctorates, etc. Such slime talkers are cowardly sneaks on the one hand, and dishonest on the other, and further promote untruth.
What you say I can understand very well because it is really the way you say it. Furthermore, it has to be said that if the human beings are not open and honest and therefore not even with hard words, whatever they may be, and also do not dare to express their clear opinion about reality and its truth, then this has nothing to do with a good colloquial mother tongue note, nursery. On the contrary, such action and behavior is, as you say, cowardice, but also the fact that the human beings do not understand the effective facts of life and all its aspects, and are therefore uneducated in terms of life behavior. Moreover, as a rule, such human beings are so taken up with themselves and with their wrong actions and their similar and sneaky behavior, as you well called it, that they cannot distinguish the wrong from the correct, which clearly indicates an intelligent disadvantage. Arrogance towards other human beings, especially those who use hard words of truth to say what corresponds to reality, and who also use hard terms with regard to human beings, is part of the usual false behavior of those who object to words of truth, because they imagine themselves to be more value-laden and are also hateful, servant, and cowardly. But these are the human beings who are alienated from life, who worship and indulge in idols and who believe that they are more alert, more capable of thinking, more educated, more knowledgeable, more sophisticated, more accomplished and superior, etc., in relation to their fellow human beings, which they are in no way.
You said that well, and you hit the nail on the head. But what I said before was a little too much, because I actually wanted to talk about something that you told me, just like your father Sfath talked about it in the 1940s, and which we've discussed in private on several occasions. I am referring to the fact that the criminal and even criminal machinations carried out in nature by the rampant overpopulation not only have a very strong impact on the climate, but also the atmosphere. And therefore also the air in which oxygen is embedded is used by many life forms, but not all, as breathing air, and only by oxygenium breathers, as Sfath called the oxygen-breathing life forms. The majority in this respect are the human beings, but also animals, creatures, reptiles, birds, fish and amphibians, etc., as well as trees, shrubs, and other plants of all kinds need it to breathe. Although the scientists responsible for this do not talk about it, perhaps because they have not yet discovered it, and therefore do not know anything about it, or because they are irresponsibly silent about it, according to your explanations, which you have so far only given privately, The breathable air in relation to the oxygen content for all those life forms has already decreased by about 40% in the last 70 years. This has been happening since overpopulation has drastically begun to rampage and has been and continues to be carried out by these self-destructive machinations of every conceivable kind in nature and on the planet itself, which have already led to irreparable destruction and even to the extermination of animals, creatures, and many plants, etc., as well as to climate change. The whole of nature and its fauna and flora, and even the human beings of the earth and even the planet itself, are already undergoing negative changes which will ultimately have serious consequences. Even if the nature-destroying criminal machinations by the overpopulation would quickly stop, the ongoing process of destruction and devastation would not be stopped in such a way that it would not continue. An immediate stop to the destruction and devastation of the environment by the irresponsible machinations resulting from overpopulation could only slow down the whole process of destruction for a very long time. But it would not regenerate everything. To regenerate everything that has been destroyed and devastated would require very, very long periods of time, but much of what has been destroyed would be irrevocably lost. This, such as the predatory and criminal exploitation of the sands of streams, rivers, lakes, and seashores to produce building materials for houses and many other structures, which are becoming more and more necessary due to the ever-growing overpopulation. This destroys the beaches of all bodies of water, which in turn leads to flooding, while fertile arable, field and garden land, as well as alluvial and mountainous areas, are irretrievably concreted over, obstructed and destroyed by the many residential buildings, as well as factories, power stations and other energy production plants of all kinds, as well as roads, streets, airports and amusement parks, etc. But this is only part of the crime, because the decomposition of sand in streams, rivers, lakes and seas, especially the decomposition of sand on the beaches, also has the consequence that the phytoplankton or the vegetable plankton is destroyed and also robbed of its habitat, about which you can perhaps explain something when I have finished everything I want to say now. That would be good, because I know that the disappearance of the phytoplankton would reduce the oxygen content on the planet to such an extent that all living beings would have to suffocate, for which the beginning is already set in the first origin by the destructive and degenerated machinations of overpopulation. And the whole thing is progressing more and more. Consequently, the free living space for mankind and for the existence of nature and its fauna and flora is becoming less and less, which is further encouraged by the stupidity of the irresponsible rulers. And this promotion is also happening irresponsibly, with more and more roads and tunnels being built which, after a considerable period of time, are inevitably overloaded and incapable of coping with the volume of traffic that is growing in relation to the growing overpopulation. So those foolhardy, brazen, and morbidly stupid rulers, who can neither think clearly and rationally nor perceive the effective facts, order that new roads and tunnels for road and rail traffic be built again and again. The same is happening with the construction of dwellings, factories, amusement parks, airports, sports facilities, and everything else imaginable that affects nature, its fauna and flora, and all existing life in general. In addition to this, many irresponsible statesmen or rulers, politicians, their lobbyists and henchmen, etc., who cooperate in governmental activities, are engaged in criminal business, such as the supply of war weapons to other countries, especially in crisis areas, which also keeps the weapons industry going and can lead to new wars, hatred, and strife, and cause many peoples to suffer hardship, misery, death, and destruction. And in order to achieve this, certain war-obsessed states and state powers are engaged in all sorts of evil machinations, and all levers are set in motion. A fact, as it is done, for example, by the Russian-hating and world-domination-addicted criminal elements of the USA, who were also able to repolish their former good president, Barack Obama, on their dirty policies and their crime machinations, and to degrade him to a puppet, because he was too naive and too weak to carry out his office of right-wingers according to his intended meaning. As a result, during his presidential years, He became a traitor to his own affirmations, promises, opinions, promises, commitments, vows, and promises of honor. A fact which unfortunately only became apparent during the years of his presidency, when it became clear that he was not capable of his office, but was at the mercy of the wrong advisors and the background government. First, he was a very good man who could have done a lot of good for the U.S. in terms of a peace-oriented U.S. policy, to stop its criminal global machinations, as well as to get the war-loving majority of the U.S. administration and the U.S. population in the mood for reconciliation with Russia. At first, everything looked good, but the more he drifted away from himself and his ideals, the more he fell prey to the same evils that have marked all U.S. powers since the U.S. presidencies were in place. Over the years and during his presidency, he changed from the first righteous president, who had wanted to and could have done a lot for the U.S. and the U.S. people and for world peace, to the influenced, unrighteous word-breaker of his promises and to the enemy of Russia. In this way, he has now also listened to the propaganda of the anti-Russian people who wanted Rodham Clinton at the helm and claimed that the Russians influenced the election. And since Obama is a Clinton supporter, he was easily influenced by the Russian hacker story. So he also, of course, through his advisors and those who conducted and manipulated him in other ways, announced the expulsion of Russian diplomats, etc. Russian President Putin reacted to this in such a way that he did not allow himself to be provoked, did not take counter-sanctions, and despite everything, took peaceful steps. This, in turn, is now being so slanderously reinterpreted by all the anti-Russian people in the US and in the EU dictatorship, unfortunately also in Switzerland, by certain brain amputees and by clueless idiotic politicians, journalists, commentators, and private individuals, that Putin's actions are dishonest and are merely designed to sneak into US politics and into the US people and to make them look like good men. And that is what the majority of the stupid US population claims, from which, of course, as usual, all the righteous human beings in the US are excluded, and the politicians or the U.S. Republicans and U.S. Democrats, as well as the EU dictatorship and also certain anti-Russian elements in Switzerland and other countries who are to be taken in the same spirit. This is because on the one hand they are too stupid, too irrational and incapable of clear thinking, and on the other hand because their intelligence is not sufficient to perceive the effective facts and to judge them correctly. Nonetheless, it is to be hoped that the newly elected U.S. President Trump will at least keep some of his serious election promises and will assert himself, fulfill them, and implement peaceful relations with Russia. It is also to be hoped that the U.S. will no longer interfere in the affairs of foreign states in terms of intelligence, politics, and military affairs, that it will no longer overthrow the governments of other countries, that it will no longer create order in its own country, and that it will do good. Of course, Trump, as I said, is not the yellow of the egg either, and therefore also dubious in his actions. But after all, he is the lesser evil compared to Hillary Clinton, who is false and devious and hostile to Russia and wanted to let a war break out. What good Trump will do now is of course also questionable and is written in the stars because he too has crazy ambitions and is a power man. But if he is really able to create good relations between the USA and Russia, if he manages to get the USA to end its wars all over the world, and if the U.S. Secret Services no longer rush the world into acts of war through infamous machinations, then much has already been won. And if Trump should also manage to build up a clean U.S. America, that would also be desirable. It is also a fact, however, that Europe may still be in danger from Russia in the future if the U.S. and EU dictatorships continue to rant, rush, impose sanctions and use terror against this state, which could well lead to Russia's patience being torn out of joint and strike at it with force of arms, as an old prophecy from Sfath says. So there is nothing left to do but wait and see what the Trump future brings, although certainly not too much of a good thing, because one way or another U.S. America will remain U.S. America. Trump may be the lesser of two evils compared to Clinton, who is false and sneaky and anti-Russian and wanted to start a war. But Trump is also U.S. American, and should therefore be treated with caution. Trump is not the yellow of the egg either, and what good he will do is also questionable, because he too has crazy impulses. But if, as I have already mentioned in another way, he can actually bring about peaceful and politically satisfactory relations between the USA and Russia, if he can actually bring about an end to the irresponsible warfare and war-inciting intelligence activities of the USA all over the world, and if the U.S. Secret Services can also stop interfering in the affairs of foreign countries with disgraceful machinations, then that would be an enormous gain. So there is no choice but to wait and see what the Trump future brings. But since Trump is not the absolute winner either, everything or at least a lot can go wrong with him, so we should not put too much hope in him. This is quite apart from the fact that under certain circumstances he may succeed in really creating the beginnings of an understanding with Russia, which could lead to the first vague steps towards world peace, as the old prophecy goes that the great world peace will one day come from Russia. But if he allows himself to be remodeled and terroristically manipulated like Obama by his advisors and presidential minions, etc., not much good could also be expected. The fact is, however, that the Russia hating like blind chickens and as judgmentless and self-involved idiots. They run after all liars and slanderers, who rise up high-handedly above others and mock and defile them with defamation, misjudgment, lies and slander in order to put themselves in the spotlight. But it is the same in the EU dictatorship, and at its decisive head is German Chancellor Merkel, who, on the one hand, as you have analyzed with her, is mentally ill and therefore not powerful in a clear sense, and on the other hand, is also Holocaust vengeful and underhandedly doing everything to defame Russia, to step into the dirt and to attack if possible even by force of arms. At the very least, however, it wants to destroy Germany, which is why it has also created a welcome culture for millions of refugees from underdeveloped third world countries and war zones. But neither do her stupid supporters see all this, nor do the politicians who flock around her, who, in their delusion of power as a result of her Merkel adoration, fail to see a single true political problem for all the problems they are unable to solve because they are self-obsessed, selfish, autocratic, and incapable of recognizing the effective truth that is emerging around them and around the world. So they do not see the Chancellor's sick state of consciousness, just as the great psychologists and psychiatrists do not see it either. As a result, tens of thousands of completely dehumanized Islamist state killers have been able to sneak in as assassins and sleepers in Germany and throughout Europe, as well as rapists of women and girls, thieves, burglars, robbers, murderers, and cheats who the security forces are already unable to control. But even this is not enough, because those who are incapable of power in the world, those who are obsessed with power, those who are in power, those who act over the heads of the people in their greed for power, are pushing it even further, especially the irresponsible lust for power of the USA, the EU dictatorship. But for some time now also the new Turkish dictator Erdogan, and around the world also the creatures of state power of various other countries, because they all cry out for war, hatred, and discord. But war, hatred, and strife are never an answer to the desire for peace, freedom, and security of earthly humanity. It is undeniably the case that peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb are the highest goods for the human beings of the earth, which they may obtain and also expect in their lives as the common property of mankind. Peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb are the most valuable things in existence. But how little have the human beings of the earth recognized this? For they have in truth not known since time immemorial how precious these goods are. Until today they have not understood that peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb are the basis and the guarantee for all happiness. Unfortunately, the fact is that they are unable to interpret and understand these values, so they also do not know how to give them to others. If the human beings love peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb, then they do not simply accept everything passively, because it is precisely by being purely passive that they allow themselves to be undermined by discord, lack of love and insecurity, which is why they allow themselves to be paralyzed by fear and lose peace, freedom, and love. This often leads to the destruction of the family and even of life. If the human beings love peace, freedom, and love, and security of life and limb, They will not allow themselves to be subdued by another human being, not even by power-obsessed governmental and official powers, etc., nor by their henchmen or by laws of terror. Peace, freedom, love, and security of life and limb are, in contrast, something completely different from hatred and war. If this were not the case, slavery would still prevail today, and the enslaving religious and sectarian beliefs would also be as coercive today as in medieval times. But even then, when even today there is not yet worldwide peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb, the best in the human beings of the earth is rebelling against this. When his clear and profound thoughts and feelings tell him that peace without love and security for life and limb is no peace, no love, and no security. In this way, the whole thing is only a cemetery peace, and such a peace, such a freedom, and such a love, and such a security could not even have been meant by former slaves, or even today, when they dreamed in their misery and in their misery of real peace, of freedom, love, and security for life and limb. Peace is freedom and security. These values mean that the human beings are free from fear, anxiety, and coercion. But peace, freedom, and security also mean for all peoples of all earthly humanity to be free from exploitation, torture, slavery, crime, persecution, rape, violence, and the death penalty. Peace, freedom, love, and security are the foundations of every humane existence. Peace, freedom, and security must also exist within the human being, in the family, in relation to one's neighbor, fellow human beings, society, and all peoples. This is the basis of happiness for every human being. Peace, freedom, love, and security are the foundations of true human being, of progress and coexistence. And without these high values, there can be no advancement of the individual human being, no advancement of the peoples, and also no happiness and thoughtful rest for all the earth humans. Peace, freedom, love, and security are not possible for the individual human beings without these inestimably high values, also being accorded to the whole human community in which the individual is embedded. The fact cannot be overturned that the individual human beings are a member of the whole of humanity, that they participate in its destiny and are inseparably and inextricably linked to its destiny and also to all life of nature and its fauna and flora. The state of peace, freedom, love, and security for each individual human being, for each people, for all humanity, and for each life form in the wild and in its fauna and flora is not possible if the entire earthly human community does not work to achieve this state. It is by no means enough simply to read, write, or talk about it, but everything must be thoroughly considered and thought through before it can also be put into practice. To read, write, or speak only fine words does not in any way bring any success, for only the comprehension of a thing leads to its flourishing and to a valuable new achievement and a consistent effect. The 3 world wars of 1756, 2 1763, 1914, 2 1918 and 1939, 2 1945, and the bloody and destructive history of the last 7 decades have shown until today that Earth humans, as they have done since ancient times, have learned nothing in terms of the precious good of peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb, not to mention the preservation of human achievements which are maliciously, wantonly, and destroyed by wars, revolutions, and terrorism. Earthly humanity has never since ancient times been punished by an imaginary creator god for discord, bondage, lack of love, and insecurity, for such a one has never existed and never will. But if, nevertheless, deities have repeatedly appeared who have wrought havoc on the earth and among earth humans, it has been power-hungry earthlings, degenerate human bastards who have brought death, ruin, and destruction and had millions and millions of human beings murdered. They have always done this not personally, but through their vassals, who fought the wars as soldiers and military men, as secret services, terrorists, and murderous mercenaries. Earth humans have thus always punished themselves terribly when they committed the breach of peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb. As a result, the human beings of the earth have always lost almost everything they possessed since time immemorial, even at the time of the first deadly battles of the primitive humans. Belongings, caves, and later house, farm and country, the family, the neighbors and fellow men, respect and prestige, but also their peace, freedom, love and security, if not least also their lives. Since time immemorial, the human beings of Earth have forgotten or never even thought of the fact that all the members of a family, a community, a people, and even the entire Earth humans are inseparably connected. So it has also never been realized that a human being can never simply separate his destiny from the destiny of his people and from the whole of humanity. For his own destiny begins when he is begotten by a father from the masses of humanity and born of a mother, after which he must continue his own destiny, but cannot live and exist without his fellow human beings and their destiny. So he cannot separate his peace, freedom and love, his security and happiness from the destiny of his people and humanity. The fact is, unfortunately, that since time immemorial, and therefore not only in our days, peace, freedom, love, and security have been threatened in every respect, and continue to be threatened as well as deeply endangered. And effectively, peace, freedom, love, and security in every respect are still threatened today, and even more than in all those past barbaric times, which are believed to have been overcome by Earth humans long ago. Even today, only the dictatorial and malicious power of those in power is still valid. And this is completely contrary to the preaching of democracy, which only exists in name, because in reality it is not the people, but the people in power who decide. Only in a few small states of the earth are there any real beginnings of democracy, such as Switzerland, where a semi-democracy exists. The whole of humanity on earth can serve the cause of peace, freedom, and security only if it is of good will as a whole to unite for common protection in a peaceful, free, and secure manner. This must not be done in a petty, unworthy manner, devoid of all inner greatness, but rather with honor, goodness, tolerance, understanding, and dignity. The effective and malicious danger that emanates from every discord, every lack of freedom and insecurity must also finally be recognized, so that no false party political posturing or power-hungry game can be played. In the struggle for peace, freedom, and security there must also be no fear or cowardice, nor subservience, just as a peace-free security process must not be hindered or destroyed by lust for power and unilateral demands for advantage, etc. If support for undignified action in the pursuit of peace, freedom, and security is given in a non-dignified manner, then this is beyond all measure as to the authenticity of such negotiations. For any undignified action in this way would be an abuse of the law, the sublime and great task of which must be to create, protect, and preserve peace, freedom, and security in an honest manner. The aspiration of the individual human beings of the earth and of all humanity on earth for peace, freedom, love, and security must be carried out in full justice, and it must be fulfilled by the human beings being genuinely honest and of good will. This goodwill has been lost by an immense number of the human beings of the earth since time immemorial. It has simply been forgotten or has fallen asleep in them, so it must be rebuilt, recalled, or awakened in them anew. In this way, it must be achieved that the human being wakes up or becomes aware of this fact again, that everything arrives in his consciousness and that he puts it into practice. Because peace, freedom and love and security for life and limb, for the protection of all achievements, for all existence and all values of life, for nature, its fauna and flora, as well as for the climate and the planet itself, require the will and the implementation of the good of the individual human being and the entire Earth humans. Every single human being on Earth must play a decisive role in this process, so that his and the Earth's population's fear and anxiety of discord, lack of freedom, lack of love and insecurity in every respect will dwindle, and the entire Earth's population will at last enjoy true peace, true freedom and love, and effective security in every good relationship. The human beings of the Earth must consciously summon up the will to first create peace, freedom, love, and security in themselves, because only through this is it also included that the whole thing also begins to have an effect in their actions and in their behavior. because only then, when they are willing to do so and implement everything in themselves in the best and good way, can it really succeed. And if all the human beings on Earth seriously want this, they can also be ready to change to peaceful, liberal, loving, and safety-oriented thinking, acting, and behavior. If the human beings sincerely want this, then they must also be prepared to act and to make sacrifices of all the discord, lack of freedom, dissatisfaction, lack of love, and insecurity of all kinds that reside within them. But the human beings who read and write good things, or only talk and criticize, but are not prepared to act first and foremost on themselves and to change everything for the better and good, have no will to do so and cannot understand or implement anything. To hesitate and dither, to see only the negative and not the positive, means in any case not wanting. It is clear that with everything that has now been said, something very serious has been addressed. But this had to be done because it is the duty to inform the human beings of the earth about the effective reality and its truth. Precisely what is important and what has to be done for every people and for the whole of humanity. And also because everything applies not only to the people of yesterday and the day before yesterday, but also to the present and future generations, and therefore also to the children and grandchildren. It had to be and must continue to be spoken seriously for the sake of peace, freedom and love, and for the sake of security for life and limb and all human spheres, all of which affects not only the peoples of Europe, but of the whole world. Peace, freedom, love, and security in all respects are very serious matters, and they are of particular importance and need, especially in the present time and in the future. This is, among many other things, the important message to be given to the human beings of the earth today. But this message also contains the very serious admonition for the earth humans to be for the creation of peace. Freedom, love, and security for body, life, and also in any other good and positive relationship of goodwill. This also includes stopping the rampant overpopulation, which is bringing irreparable disaster and destruction to mankind, because otherwise it's degenerated and further on speculative machinations on nature. Its fauna and flora, as well as on the atmosphere and air and on the climate and the planet, will bring about its irreparable downfall.
I would like to say something else about the phytoplankton you mentioned, namely that this is also called photoautotrophic plankton or vegetable plankton. And it also represents organisms that drift with the current in the water, whereby they have in common that they cannot move against the current. Plankton generally serves as food for aquatic life, such as the blue whales. It consists mainly of cyanobacteria, dinoflagellates, diatoms, golden algae, and green algae. Phytoplankton grows in the surface waters of the oceans and other waters, drifting with the water currents. They are extremely dependent on sunlight, carbon dioxide, or CO2, and on water, because only then can they produce phytoplankton as organic material through the process of photosynthesis. They feed on it and use it to build up their cells, but waste products are also produced, one of which is the oxygen that all life forms use through their respiration. This is the most important thing.
But with regard to the process of photosynthesis, I learned from Sfath that oxygen photosynthesis is basically the oldest, most important, and significant biogeochemical process on Earth, which ultimately also produces oxygen as a waste product. However, the formation of the so-called disoxygen is important in this process, which in turn is only created through the presence of atomic oxygen. It is therefore not correct to assume that oxygen only results from the photosynthesis process in trees and all plants, as is unfortunately assumed as a result of incorrect or insufficient school instruction and general education. Photosynthesis, through the formation of organic substances by means of light or solar energy, directly and indirectly drives almost all existing ecosystems, providing all other life forms with energy-rich building materials and, above all, also vital energy. Oxygen, a waste product of photosynthesis, which is useful to most living beings for energy production, with cellular respiration acting as an oxidant, was also very important in the early days of oxygen, namely that higher life forms could develop as a result of oxygen photosynthesis. But oxygen is also very important in other ways, such as in relation to ozone, which is called O3 and from which the protective ozone layer is formed, which was very badly damaged by the human beings on Earth during the last century with CFCs and almost led to their collapse because the CFC gases, which you call bromine gases, destroyed the ozone. The formation of the element oxygen, which has the sign O2, only made life possible when it entered the atmosphere, which, as your father Sfath explained to me, required atomic oxygen for its formation, or oxygen in the form of free, individual oxygen atoms, which are only stable under extreme conditions, such as the vacuum of the universe, or in hot solar atmospheres. Elementary oxygen occurs predominantly in the form of a compound of two oxygen atoms as molecular oxygen or dioxygen or disoxygen. Oxygen is a colorless and odorless gas, which is contained in the air to about 21%, along with other gases, but I cannot list them all, which you might be able to do. Oxygen is also necessary for a fire to burn at all, or to operate internal combustion engines or combustion processes. Oxygen is also involved in aging and corroding of things. Therefore, for example, rusting of iron or fogging of copper and silver, etc., as well as age changes of all kinds of materials, and the whole flora can only be caused by the element oxygen. As already mentioned, nearly all living beings need oxygen to breathe and live, but when breathing out oxygen is released as carbon dioxide or CO2. Plants, on the other hand, generally reject more oxygen than they consume as a result of the photosynthesis process, which they usually remove from the air by breathing or by absorption as dissolved oxygen from water. As a gas, which it is, oxygen is toxic to most life forms in high concentrations.
This is all correct, what you say, and apparently I have to go into more detail about everything in your opinion. Then there is this. It is absolutely correct that oxygen photosynthesis is one of the oldest and most important biogeochemical processes on the planet. Photosynthesis corresponds to the process of producing energy-rich biomolecules from energy-poor materials using light or solar energy. In fact, through the formation of organic substances by means of solar energy, it directly and indirectly drives almost all existing ecosystems, whereby other life forms also receive energy-rich building materials and the necessary amounts of energy. Of course, you are also right about this, what you said about oxygen being used by other life forms for energy production, etc., as well as the fact that the ozone layer is built up of oxygen. Photosynthesis is carried out by algae, many different plants, and by certain bacteria. In this biochemical process, light energy is first converted into chemical energy by light-absorbing dyes, such as bacteriochlorophyll and chlorophyll. Then, among other things, organic compounds, mostly carbohydrates, are used to build up energy-rich. Organic compounds, mostly carbohydrates, from inorganic and low-energy substances, that is to say CO2 or carbon dioxide, and mostly H2O or water. This synthesis is called assimilation because the energy-rich organic substances become components of the life forms. However, a distinction is made between oxygen and anoxygen photosynthesis, whereby the oxygen produces molecular oxygen, while the anoxygen does not. However, other inorganic substances can be produced instead of oxygen, such as elementary sulfur. As already explained, and I have to explain repeatedly, oxygen photosynthesis is the oldest and most important biogeochemical process on Earth. And through the formation of organic substances by means of solar energy, it directly and indirectly drives almost all existing ecosystems and provides other living beings with energy-rich building materials and energy. Phytoplankton, as primary producer, builds up its biomass or body substance with the help of the photosynthesis process from solar energy, carbon dioxide, and nutrients as primary production. Phytoplankton drifting in stagnant and slowly flowing waters is basically the basis of the autochthonous food pyramid. It is used as food by zooplankton as well as by many aquatic organisms that live at the bottom of inland waters and seas. These planktonic life forms, which can be so-called, have developed amazing net-like structures that enable them to filter the plankton out of the water. The most remarkable of all direct food chains being phytoplankton. And if oxygen is calculated as a percentage of the phytoplankton waste produced on Earth, we have records that show an average current level of 70% of the total Earth's oxygen production, which means that only about 30% of the total Earth's oxygen comes from forests and plants of all surface species. It should also be mentioned that according to our records and calculations, since the end of the Third World War in 1945, the total oxygen content of the earthly atmosphere, or air, has fallen by 0.416%, which is already causing breathing difficulties for many life forms, also for many Earth humans. If, however, this oxygen continues to decrease as the phytoplankton dwindles, then all respiration-dependent life on Earth will suffocate. And this can happen if the other 30% that produces oxygen, such as the trees, rainforests, and other oxygen-supplying forests and plants, etc., also die. If we consider the phytoplankton of the oceans and all inland waters, it consumes about as much CO2 as all land plants on all continents. This is also the reason why good climate regulation plays a very important role. If we consider the oxygen content of the atmosphere or air, it is not constant but fluctuates, albeit only slightly, which is due to the fact that the oceans, with their algae in the northern and southern hemispheres of the Earth, have approximately the same proportion. On the other hand, the seasonal proportion of forests and other green plants is roughly the same in the northern and southern hemispheres. However, it is worth noting that the forests in the northern hemisphere are leafless in winter, while those in the southern hemisphere remain green throughout the year. For this reason, the oxygen content in the northern areas increases somewhat when spring starts in the northern hemisphere for the leafy forests, the forest tundra, and the taiga.
So the important explanation in connection with phytoplankton is the oxygen production. But can you please give me the composition data of the atmospheric air, because I am not familiar with the exact composition.
The composition of atmospheric air consists of the noble gases argon, helium, neon, krypton, and xenon, as well as carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen, nitrous oxide, laughing gas, and carbon monoxide, in addition to the main gases oxygen and nitrogen. What proportions of these substances are present in the air and which are to be listed as volume fractions of all substances mentioned? I can, of course, name them. If you were to list them as a table when recalling our conversation, everything would be clear. When naming the characters, you must also pay attention to the high and low numbers. It is important to explain that I list the gas contents from the highest to the lowest value, as well as that the oxygen makes up 20.995% of the total volume. The whole data to be mentioned are now as follows. Main component symbol volume percentage nitrogen N 278.08, oxygen O 220.995, carbon dioxide CO 20.04, argon R 0.93, neon Ni 0.0018, helium He 0.0005, methane CH 40.00018, krypton Kr 0.00011. Hydrogen H20.00005, nitrous N2O 0.00003, carbon monoxide CO 0.00002, xenon Xe 0.000009.
Now we have a brief treatise on phytoplankton, the process of photosynthesis, oxygen production, and the composition of the atmospheric air.
You can say that, yes.
Well, thanks for all your explanations, which actually brings me back to questions about Wi-Fi, which Njana told you about so that you can decide.
In this respect, we have found that everything that is done privately and also used in this way must remain a private matter. So if the Wi-Fi network is used privately, then all users have to be financially responsible for this privately, as well as for telephone connections, telephone calls, and radio and TV fees.
So it is clear. It really cannot be any different, because the private sphere must remain private, in every respect. But what I also want to ask is this. You already said some time ago that Sfath and Yanarara will come here to clarify some things regarding the strange incidents that keep happening and that you cannot explain yourself, despite all your efforts to clarify them. It is simply annoying what happens over and over again, especially since I have been working with the computer since 2001, and I have been harmed over and over again, along with all the other strange things that happen over and over again. Talking about this openly is not exactly advisable, because otherwise we will be called crazy, because the whole of all the strange and unbelievable occurrences cannot be explained in a reasonable way. But the two of them, Yanarara and Sfath, have not yet made themselves heard, so I would be interested to know when they are coming.
Both of them have already been working every few days for about a month in the entire center area, although of course they cannot be observed due to their shielding. And what all has been revealed so far is that with absolute certainty, no earthly jamming transmitters or similar devices have been installed anywhere, as was unfortunately the case elsewhere when you lived at Weihaldenstrasse 10 in Hinwil. They were also able to clearly establish that the protective screen shows no signs of foreign influences, so that no attempts were made to penetrate it with the intention of causing damage. So such attacks can also be ruled out with absolute certainty. What is open, however, refers to the energy supply lines to the center, which could be susceptible, just could be, because in this respect everything is also in order, because there is also a safeguard for this. A weak point could also be the internet, but you are not directly connected to it, so this factor does not have to be considered either. But what has now been found elsewhere is a matter that has not yet been satisfactorily clarified, which is why some more time is needed to clarify it. As Yanarara and Sfath reported, they came across the trace of very unusual, strong energetic vibrations, the origin of which they have not yet been able to fathom, on the one hand, and on the other hand, these energies are able to weaken the protective shield applied and thus penetrate it in a weakened way. And what results from this, and this is already a safe assumption, are clearly the strange occurrences that occur again and again in the center, as well as in connection with your computer.
So we cannot assume the same or a similar thing has happened in Hinwil before?
That is correct, because these very strong energies are a form, which is also unknown to Yanarara, and therefore, of course, also unknown to the Sonians. And the fact that Yanarara was able to register these energies at all was only because she, together with Sfath, developed completely new apparatus over the years that are able to record these energies. These are unusually strong and have vibrations that have just as negative an effect on the human body as the apparatuses and devices developed by Yanarara are also strangely affected. However, she first has to find out the origin of these vibrations, which she has been working on for more than a month. This, in addition to the fact that she frequently carries out investigations in the center grounds together with Sfath, which she intends to complete in 2 days, only to concentrate on the study in relation to the energies she has determined. After that, when she has investigated everything and will have come to a result, she wants to come to you together with Sfath and report how and what can be done or not.
Ah, so Yanarara has been with you for a long time and has been working with Sfath.
Yes, for more than 16 years now. But last year she was back in her home on Sonara for 4 months, where she visited her family and also spent her holidays.
Is certainly an interesting personality that I like to be surprised by when she comes here with Sfath.
Interesting, because she said something similar about your personality. and she does not want to miss the opportunity to make your acquaintance.
As usual, I am looking forward to it, also to meeting someone again. Wait, you hear the phone ringing, but now I will just let it ring.
It is unpleasant, and surely it is also not necessary to disturb us in our conversation.
It does not stop, but I am not answering now.
It should finally.
I can also do more than tell you not to interrupt. But now the doorbell does not ring anymore.
Please go and say that you should not be disturbed now.
Okay, here I am again and hope that nobody disturbs anymore. Then you can start again with your explanation, please.
That would be nice. Especially also because now you are supposed to have a private conversation with my daughter Simya Se during the next 30 minutes. As she wishes, you have to come with me because I cannot connect with her from here.
This is a very pleasant and unexpected surprise. Open the gate and we can leave right away.